So if you search up the Canon EOS RP on YouTube, you'll find a lot of videos talking about how people canceled their pre-orders or how Canon made a huge mistake. The problem with these videos, though, is that they're very outdated. When this camera was first announced, there was a lot of controversy. The reason for this was that it was originally going to release without 24 frame per second video on full HD. This basically meant that for filmmakers, this camera was useless. You couldn't record in 24 frames per second in 1080p or 4K. After the uproar, that quickly changed though, and they released a firmware update allowing people to record in 24 frames per second. So now, is the Canon EOS RP worth it? This is a full frame camera for only about $900, and if you get the lens with it, it's about $1,200. That's like really, really cheap for a full frame camera. And why you want a full frame camera is because it does way better in low light. There also isn't a crop on the lens if you have a full frame camera. So what are my thoughts on this camera? Well, I think it's pretty good. Canon's color science is really nice and produces a really natural, nice color. Like the skin tones are never really wacky on this. When I get the footage from this camera, it doesn't feel like I have to do a lot of color correcting afterwards. All the color correcting I do is really just for aesthetics. The ergonomics of this camera are really good. I love holding it and shooting with it because it just feels really nice and comfortable. It's like a really natural body. The battery life isn't amazing, so I'd recommend buying more batteries to have extras, but I don't think it's awful battery life. I really like the screen on this camera. It pulls out and you can turn it around. So it's really good for vlogs and videos like this where I need to see how my shot looks. So I can see it right there. See, you can see myself on the screen. I think everything about the body itself is really, really great. And I do love having the full frame low light performance. I think it performs pretty good in low light. This camera still has issues though, and I don't think any firmware update can fix them. Really, the main issue with the camera is that even though it's full frame, you can't record 4K in full frame. There's a crop on your sensor and it'll zoom everything in. I like having my lens sizes the way they are, and I don't really want a zoom in, so I record in 1080p. I still think 1080p is a good resolution though. I don't really see that much of a difference between 4K and 1080. I mean, there obviously is a difference, but I think as resolution just keeps getting higher and higher, it doesn't really matter as much to me that something can record in 4K or 1080 or 6K or 8K. It's something that at least I'd like the option to have though. I'd like to shoot 4K with a full sensor, but instead to get the whole full sensor, I have to use 1080p, and that kind of blows. Another thing that sucks about this camera is there's no C-Log, which isn't that much of a problem, but it's something that I feel like they could just add with a firmware update, but they didn't because they want to create this false sort of monetary difference between their different cameras. I just personally changed the settings of my camera's profile to be lower contrast so we can get the most dynamic range. But I saw some people installing stuff onto their camera that allowed them to have log. I don't know if that's good or that's bad, but it's something I feel like Canon should have just put in the camera to begin with. I feel like there's nothing really stopping them from doing it. They just didn't. But yeah, overall, for the price point, I think this camera is actually really good. For low budget for vlogging or a beginner starter camera, I think this is actually a really good option. I think with an ND filter and a decent mic attached to this camera, you can get a really good image. And I think if you don't want to pay more than $1,000 for a camera body, this is actually a really good option. I understand why there was a controversy. That was stupid of Canon to not have 24 frames per second initially on this camera. Considering it's fixed now, better late than never. It's not the best, of course, but for a beginner camera. Subscribe if you want more content like this, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.